All right. Welcome everyone to the first budget council meeting of this fiscal year 26 budget planning process. This used to be called UFRAC, and we changed the name to budget council last year. We'll see if a couple more come in. I don't see anybody from SGA, I don't think. Most everybody else is here. Looks like so. We'll get going and
Switched on. Show me the advanced one. There's Mark Gordon. Is that keyboard with it?
you have to handle it.
You may be too. We can get started.
That's pretty good.
So, yeah. We'll see what this clicker does, but so the next slide should be the agenda slide. So generally, we have four things planned to cover today. One is projected revenue is the second one. The third one is compensation. There we go. All right. Yeah, so current budget and just the operating environment we're in, and then we'll take a look at projected revenue. And then focus on compensation. Thought it'd be really good since that's the thing we hear the most about, to just kind of lay out what the investments will be. Investments that will be needed to address compensation. Thank you. And then we'll talk about the budget process for fiscal year 26. So those are the four main topics, and then we can talk about whatever you all want to talk about. So start with the operating environment. Just want to touch on a few of these. Some of this is going to be repetitive for those of you that attended any of the budget input sessions. So we're including some of the same information just because I think it's relevant. But having the largest freshman class for the past two fall semesters definitely impacts the operating environment. It's starting to stress some of our infrastructure, like parking and housing and dining in particular. So those are things that we have to be cognizant about, and the investments that are required to address those issues do impact our reserves substantially. So it's important to know that that's something we got to worry about. Our enrollment goal of 14,800 by 2030, that certainly impacts our operations. And then we're expected to maintain an affordable and reasonable tuition environment. That's both from the Board of Trustees and from the General Assembly. So that's just an expectation we have to live within. We'll show some projections for tuition increases, but we currently do not have any indication where we will be allowed to go with tuition increases. We'll talk about that more later. And then, of course, compensation needs, everyone's aware of those, and we'll talk more about that. And then you can see the other things on the screen. I won't go through verbatim. VRIP is something we'll touch on as well, just the status of where we are. And then just looking at some of the continued initiatives on campus. So compensation, we're in the middle of strategic planning. We're working to incorporate total organizational health concepts throughout operations. We're still looking at what we would need to do to have R2 designation, which is something that's become important to the community. And then still focusing on things like teacher education and nursing. These are all critical to the community. These are the things the community expects us to focus on, as well as some of the other things we're focusing on. Student recruitment and retention, as well as dual enrollment, are all priorities, especially as we look at our enrollment goals. And then all the capital projects we have certainly are stressing some of our capacity across campus. So next, we'll look at just some of the drivers for the budget. So our $252 million operating budget is driven, of course, by enrollment. And you can see undergraduate, graduate enrollment, the number of employees, which is our largest cost. Salary and benefits are certainly our largest cost. We also are showing like six-year graduation rate, degrees awarded. These are all things that impact our funding formula. And then We have approximately $430 million of capital projects that are in process right now. This shows a snapshot of revenues, where they come from. So you can see 54% comes from tuition and fees, 33% from state appropriations, and then you can see auxiliaries, 10% of our total budget. The expense side will show, if we looked at it by functional area, auxiliaries would match on the expense side. Those are all self-sustaining operations. But when we look at expenses by natural classification, you can see 65% of our costs are salaries and benefits. So that's increased by about 1% each year for the past few years. So as we've invested more in compensation, that the portion of our expenses have shifted about 1% per year to salaries and benefits. So we'll look at a couple more slides, and then I'm going to turn it over to Chris to talk a little bit about funding formula and projected revenues. So this shows since 2018 where we've been with tuition and fees. You can see the blue shaded area is fairly flat from 2018 to 2025. The gold area is a little steeper increase than those of state appropriations, which is good. This is what we're expected to do, is maintain that affordable tuition environment. And then this is something we put into the slide deck this year in the info sessions, and I think it's really relevant. So this shows back to fall 2020. The blue line shows our budget expectation and where we were with the actual revenues. So income is the gold line. And you can see that the expectation continued to increase when the actuals were dropping. We just now, this past fall, got back to the enrollment that we need for the budget that we've had since 2020. We never did recurring budget cuts. You all may recall we had a couple of years of non-recurring budget cuts, but we never did recurring. So we're finally back to that baseline. So going forward, we can use fall of 24 as our baseline instead of fall of 20. And then you can see the graduate side as well. This year with our increase in graduate enrollment, we did surpass the expectation, which is good. And then this slide shows since 2018 where we've invested our increases in revenue. So this is just the incremental increases in revenue each year and where it went. So compensation, you can see that gray area at the bottom. Since 2021, we've had a pretty substantial investment in compensation. And then the gold, which is institutional, that's all the things that are unavoidable, from UT system charges to capital matches to everything in between. So those are the two primary places we've spent our incremental increases in revenue since 2021. So this slide is just an overview of our total budget. So rounding to $252 million, 35% of the budget is academic affairs, as you would expect, followed by central benefits, PHMSA, finance administration. And then the institutional expenses we broke out separate just to show that's approximately, let's just call it $19 million of unavoidable costs. So those are really costs that we don't really have much control over. So the amount we pay to the UT system, debt service, utilities, which fluctuates, throughout the year, and then some of our non-recurring expenses. And then you can see the remainder in order of how large the budgets are. This one breaks down academic affairs by college, so you can see the budget as well as the number of faculty and staff and enrollment for each college. There's a note at the bottom that shows all the undeclared majors so that we can balance to what's on the institutional dashboard. Administration, that's provost office plus Walker Center, CPE, OPIR, registrar, grad school, all the administrative portions of academic affairs. And then this breaks out all the divisions by budget and number of employees. This just further breaks out the previous slide that showed the budgets, just so you can see how many employees are included in each division. And then this one is a snapshot of our campus reserves at the time we prepared this. So you can see we have $87 million in reserves. However, we only have $28 million available. So the obligations, especially for under campus reserves, a lot of that is tied up with capital. Some of that's money we won't actually spend, but we have to commit it until we get some gift funds from donors. So That's just something that the system requires us to do. Mandatory fees, those are all the fees that we charge, for specific things, so you can see what's available at 7 million, and those are fairly restricted to what they were charged for. Divisions and colleges have the largest balance available. So that's come up recently at UT system meetings. We will likely start getting some direction from the system about how we have to spend some of our funds. So one example that's come up from the board is to require that we spend differential fees first by college. They haven't said they're going to do that yet, but it sounds like they're moving that way. UT system is getting a lot of pressure from the General Assembly for the amount of reserves that we have out there. There's about $1 billion in reserves across the system. Half of that's in Knoxville, and then the remainder is kind of split between all the other divisions of UT system, campuses and divisions. So now a lot of that is committed because of all the capital that's happening, especially between here and Knoxville. There's just a lot of reserves that are capital related. So we may change the way we do some of the reporting, but we also might have some policy changes that require us to operate a little bit differently. So we'll know more about that between now and February. I know we have a meeting in January it's mostly focused on capital projects, but I do think, and that's a CBO meeting along with facility heads at each campus. But I think we're also going to talk about fund reporting and cash management and all those things as well, because a lot of it's tied together, some of it's not, but I know those are still on the agenda. So that's where we are from a reserve standpoint. With auxiliaries, you can see there's a decent balance, but a lot of that's obligated, and then what's not obligated, we will obligate soon because we have a need for the new residence hall that's in programming now, or design now. Program's complete, it's almost done with design. We have a new parking structure that's in programming for 8th and Houston Street, and that needs to open when the dorm opens. And then we also need to do a dining hall, especially with where our enrollment is, and that is something that we hope to get some clarity on here in the next month about which direction we can go. Right now, we've got a proposal from Aramark that's a strong proposal to extend their contract. It includes a lot of funding for the dining hall. We just need to see if we can move forward with that or if we're going to be required to do an RFP. RFPs aren't required by policy for revenue contracts, but sometimes the board decides they want to see RFPs. So we'll see where we are with that. So that's all on reserves. Next, we're going to go to funding formula and just talk about that briefly. I'm going to let Chris talk about it because he definitely knows more about it than I do.
Well, switching gears and kind of looking at, for FY26 for the budget planning period, the outcomes-based funding formula is what we've been using for a large of 30, almost 50 years now. But
It hasn't changed much. Yeah.
not that much. So, but THEC sends out their formula funding recommendation each year. So this year, right now, where we are, we don't know exactly what we're going to receive because we haven't seen the governor's budget proposal yet. But we have a little bit of insight into what we could get, and so we're trying to predict what we're going to get here. So it uses each of the public state universities uses all the same common data here shared, and it's utilized by taking 3-year averages of each of the universities. They then scale them, they weight them, they combine them and put them into the calculation. And so looking here, just to kind of give you an indicator of trend on what we're doing here, it takes the 3 years of average data. And so this for FY26, they're going to be using FY22, 23, and 24 data. And this shows the data speaking towards the student progression, 30, 60, 90 hours, and our total degree completion. So this includes all the bachelor's, reverse associates, doctoral, master's degrees. And then if you'll see just a trend, FY20 and FY21 are no longer going to be considered in our funding formula. Those 2 years are very kind of high performing years for the university. And so we're kind of going to see some fruition of a possible downtrend in the next year. And you also see from other state universities, that's not out of the norms for everybody else. But just to kind of project what the trend is, we're looking for the next year or two, possibly, when it comes to the funding formula. Another visual that kind of shows that same trend when it talks to six-year graduation rate, everything's relatively close, between 64 and 68% from year to year. But again, the FY20 and FY21 data is pretty high there, and that's being lost from the calculation going forward. So in the THEC funding recommendation that they sent out, THEC funding formula, there's two big pieces of it. One, the first column there is the productivity or the outcomes formula. This is the same portion of funds that all state universities share amongst each other, and based on performance, you kind of either lose some or you gain some. And so you can see through UT Chattanooga, we're looking at adjusting off about a little over $1.2 million for the productivity formula over the year, but you'll notice the trend across the state is the same, except for Knoxville and Memphis. I think this is probably a byproduct of the booming years before COVID. Then we have a lot of enrollment changes across the state, and progression changes, retention changes across the state. And so I think this kind of, if I'm assuming here that this kind of screams that, Knoxville and Memphis kind of have a different situation than what a lot of the other public state universities have. And so this is definitely a trend, not just for us, but everyone else across the state. And then the second column there, that's the new funding percentage. So each year the governor will recommend a pot of funds to award to higher education general, and based on the productivity, or based on our calculations and our funding formula results, UTC should gain about a little over 5% of what that funding will be. So what does that mean in terms of actual revenue that we're projecting? Well, again, we don't know exactly how much money the governor is going to put into the budget proposal. But based on a $40 million allocation to higher education, UTC would receive a little over $2 million in funding. And then we have the adjustment due to productivity and outcomes. We would have to reduce that by 1.2 million. And then each year the state usually will allocate also for a separate salary pool. We don't have any indicators exactly what that salary pool is going to be, but we, for all intents and purposes, pretty much are planning on a 3%. We think that's pretty much in a range of what's going to happen. So a 3% salary pool, which the state typically allocates about 65% of that cost to us, would be about $2.3 million. So collectively, looking at about a $3 million of new money potentially university can receive from state appropriations. Of course, that's largely based on a $40 million projection. If they put in $80 million, $120 million, that will certainly go up. Also, that works the other way too. So if they decide to put in $20 million, I think $40 million allocation is pretty conservative there. And I think it's pretty much in line with what we possibly could expect from the governor.
What happened last year?
Last year was right around $40 million.
And last year we netted 1.4 million from the formula, I think, if I remember correctly. This would net about 800,000. But one thing that's up in the air is just generally at state level is I mean, this has been out in the news. They're pushing to invest highly in K-12 vouchers. And to go along with that, they're also proposing large investments in K-12 other than vouchers, right? To try to get consensus or say, well, if we're going to make you do this, we're also going to give you this. So they've talked about building a school in Everett County. They've talked about all kinds of different things. So I think it really, really depends on what happens with the voucher bill and where the money goes. So if there's a whole lot of money put into K-12, I think there's going to be 40 million or less in higher ed, but there could be some He could also put more into higher ed just because he's doing K-12, just to try to balance that out. So that we'll see where the governor lands on that, but it's, a lot of it's up in the air around the voucher bills currently. Yeah, so for tuition, the THEC binding range is currently 0 to 4%. Last year, they changed that at the last minute, so we don't know if they'll change that again this year. We really have zero indication of where the board will go with tuition. So I know last year when all the campuses proposed tuition increase, they didn't like that, and we said, well, hopefully this doesn't happen next year. So we've had 2 years in a row of increases. I think a lot of it's going to depend on what Knoxville does, for better or for worse. I think last year the answer was no until Knoxville pushed for one, and then we all got one. I know that Chattanooga and Martin would like to get a 1 or 2% tuition increase, particularly with our compensation issues and the low amount of money we expect to see from the state. So if we can get a 2% tuition increase, I think we will, because that's another 1.9 million that we can put into our recurring budget, especially if we focus on compensation. And then of course, mandatory differential fees will go along with what we do on tuition. For auxiliaries, we're looking at 4% for all auxiliaries. So that includes parking, which last year we did 0% on parking. We're just in a place where it's going to be really difficult for us to not increase parking again based on the needs and with the parking across campus. So, and then the mandatory fee increase will all be transportation debt service, which is basically what's been 3 years now, because that's where we have to continue increasing those with all the projects we have going on. And then housing at 4% as well, which is what we've done for a couple of years. And of course, costs on all those, so whether it's meal plans, parking, or housing, the costs are also increasing for all those areas, and they of course need to be self-sustaining. So we're trying to do as minimal an increase as possible while also generating enough revenue to cover the cost. So this, 1.4 million last year. So you can see on this slide, it shows just fiscal year 21 through fiscal 25, what we've done, just highlight for each budget. So we've gone from a $204 million budget to 252, and tuition increases, we did 3 out of 5 years. So 22, 24, and 25. You can see the funding formula numbers. So even if we net 800,000 this year, it's not terribly different from last year. It is, I mean, it's $600,000, but you can see the fiscal year 23 number was the boom year. Of course, that included those pre-COVID years.
They're catching us up.
Yeah. And then you can see the state appropriation dollars each year. So it gives you an idea of what we've got each year and similar to what we're expecting this year. From a comp plan perspective, back in 21, the only thing we did were faculty promotions. We've done faculty promotions every year, but then in 22, we also did staff equity and $11 minimum wage and a 2.75% across the board. The next year, 3% plus $13 minimum wage, additional equity. In 24, there's a 4% plus $15 minimum wage and compression adjustments. You all may remember that we were only able to fund like quarter or so of what we needed to do for compression. That's just what we had available. And then this last year, it was such a low increase from the state that we can only do the 3% plus faculty promotion. So, and then that bottom line shows you how much money we invested in compensation each year. So fairly substantial across the board. So next, we're going to turn it over to Lori to talk a little bit about compensation and go through both faculty and staff compensation analysis at a high level. She's got a tremendous amount of detail that goes behind all this, but at least this will give us enough to talk about where we are and where we.
All right, so what you're seeing here is a snapshot of a product of our most recent consulting project with Siegel Consulting Firm. A lot of you might be familiar, you've heard that language Siegel Consulting, we've engaged with them multiple times to do compensation analysis projects for faculty. We started that collaboration again late last fall, and in September, they returned some product and reports to us. So this gives a snapshot of our market position and the cost it would take to lift salaries to certain market ranges. So the top area there identifies faculty by rank, and then on the bottom it's by college to give you a count and then a cost summary. And you're seeing this with an overview of two comparison groups. You're familiar, we use comparison groups for all of our compensation projects. You're looking at two of the four that we've used for the last several years. First being the Tennessee Public Higher Education Institutions. Those are 4-year public higher education institutions. And then a comparison group that we established many years ago in a collaboration project with Huron Consulting to identify institutions that have similar research designations to us. We're familiar, Knoxville's an R1 institution. This comparison group pulls out SRE B2 and 3 designation institutions. And the reason why we're only looking at these two is because they give us the more competitive data. So we always pull data for our peer institution group and our aspirational peer institutional group. Remember, those are board approved, and that's what a lot of our data is organized by from a university perspective. But with those of you that are familiar with those comparison groups, they aren't, from our perspective, a great comparison point. We do our due diligence in pulling data associated with those groups, but we just don't see their numbers line up with market the way that we do when we look at these two others. So we want to be mindful that if we're looking to make good advancements in the compensation realm, we really want to pay attention to what our market may be out there. I know a question and a point of concern among many faculty salaries is always Knoxville. How is Knoxville compensating for these similar disciplines? The Tennessee Public Higher Ed Comparison Group captures Knoxville data. So that includes all of our UT partners that our other comparison groups otherwise would not. So what it demonstrates here is showing the market range, giving us a range of 85% to 115% of market. That's what we've always considered a competitive range point. We talked about that in connection with faculty for quite some time. And those of you that may remember a number of years ago, it was pre-pandemic, I think it was 2018, 2019, we did dedicate funding to lifting all faculty to 85% of market. That's really what we would consider our entry point. But as you can see, this most recent analysis shows us that we've gotten away from that with updated market data. There's a cost associated with doing that again. So you'll see in the total lines for the Tennessee Public Comparison Group to lift all ranks to the 85% mark would be around $300,000. SREB2 is showing $568,000. That would really be what we would consider our minimal effort. And from a compensation perspective, that's not the ideal area to focus. You would need to throw our net much wider to really make advancement and to consider providing competitive salaries to our faculty. But it does show that there's a gap, that's the minimum of our problem. The 85% of full market median is where you would expect to see most positions, staff or faculty, if they are newer to their profession. Quartiles and ranges, percentiles of these ranges help us. We can utilize them, and it's helpful to us to distinguish among service and among experience, which is very important from a compensation perspective. So when you see things like the rank of professor, and there being a need for $147,000 to $305,000 to lift them to 85%, that means that those that have achieved rank of professor, the highest rank of faculty, some of them still fall, but outside of that 85%, which you really want to consider your entry level point. So the money that would be required, the funding that would be required to make proper advancements at a minimum would fall at that gap there to the 85%. So that's why we have the designation. And at the bottom, it speaks more towards a more competitive approach. So we're looking at around $600,000, but if we really want to advance our salaries and advance in what we consider market competitive ranges, it's looking more at that 50th percentile. That's considered full market median. So you would expect to see someone who's well qualified, has several years of demonstrated success and a positive record of performance at the 50th percentile of their range. So when you start to look at those numbers, they're much different, right? That's where we're getting in the $2+ million range to lift people appropriately to that point. That would be to lift all ranks and all faculty that currently fall below it. However, if we adopted a compensation plan where we use that 85% to 100% range, not everyone would need to be adjusted to that point. Those that are new to the profession and more entry level probably could stay at anywhere from 85 to 95%. But the large majority of individuals in those classifications would need to be advanced beyond that. And so those figures, 600,000 to 2.9 million, if we look at our more competitive comparison group, are big numbers. And that does not address compression. So this helps to demonstrate how large of a compensation need we have and how important it is to dig into these numbers and try to identify every available dollar we can to really place people in the ranges where they should be. So advancing everyone to full market median, that is a huge win. That means we're market competitive for those that should be there. But again, it doesn't address compression. So it's not addressing, and we could be advancing in that process someone with 5 years and 10 years to the same salary point where you would not expect them to be at that same salary point based on experience. And that would be a very important next step is to dedicate funding. So there's so much more that goes into this. So this is truly just a snapshot. I'm hopeful that it's helpful to tell the story of the need that we have only from a faculty perspective. But we were projecting, looking at that full market median, it would require the 2.9 million plus at least another million to address compression. And that's not to address compression fully, but it's to put a plan in place where we'd be able to see staggered salaries. We wouldn't see everyone lumped at the median. So that alone is roughly $4 million in a compensation need for faculty.
And I think one way to look at this, especially knowing that revenue is going to be constrained, we can't do all this at once. So I think if we were, for example, say, all right, let's see if we can get 600,000 into faculty compensation this year. That gets us that at least addresses the 85th percentile issue. And it's a start, right? It helps us get along. So it's going to have to be a multi-year phase plan regardless, but we thought it would be important to just kind of demonstrate what the projected costs are to get compensation where we all would like it to be. Talk about staff now.
I will. So let's switch gears to staff, and you'll see that the need from a funding perspective is very similar. And I will say, with the projected need of 2 million plus another million in compression, that's conservative. That's conservative. That would be to make a good start at fully addressing the compensation needs that we have for staff. So what you're looking at here are, for the first two fiscal years, are the adjustments that were made to address the minimum hourly rate. You may recall several years ago, not too long ago, our minimum hourly rate on campus was $10.10. We advanced it to a little over 11, and then again in fiscal year 23 to $13 an hour. Moving it further, another 15% adjustment in fiscal year 24 to $15 an hour. That being a very big win and a very, very good start to a livable wage. We know that was near and dear to the entire campus, and we were excited to be able to do it. But when you provide a 15+% adjustment to our first market range, the lowest market range 1, and that's largely represented by our custodian, it creates compression. And we've, based on limited funding, identified a plan to try to address compression, realizing that the needs were much, much larger. So what it shows you for fiscal year 23, our market ranges go all the way up to 30+. But the reason why it only lists market ranges 1 through 6 is we only had funding available to try to provide incremental adjustments to those next market ranges when we made the increase in market range 1. So further broadening that scope in fiscal year 24 to market range 9, and that addressed nearly 70% of our staff. So it was very exciting to be able to do something that impacted the majority population. But what it shows you here is entry level rates that we set for each of those ranges to respond to the adjustment in market range one and try to create incremental adjustments in each of the successive ranges. But not everyone was below that entry level. So there were some employees that didn't receive adjustments because they were already beyond the entry level rate, and we simply did not have funding to duplicate the spread. In an ideal world, if you give a 15% adjustment to market range one, you give a 15% adjustment to all successive market ranges, that duplicates the spread. Especially if you anticipate that people are where they should be from an experience perspective. And we had, that was well over $2 million to look at that kind of an approach just through market range 9. But obviously, when you make adjustments to market range 9, it requires adjustments moving forward. But we did our best to set those rates and try to create the separation and address compression. And what you see in fiscal year 26, this is just a snapshot of our current position. Because of the adjustments that were made, we continue to adjust our market ranges. Every year we apply an escalator to try to address market. So when that's applied, or when it was, because it's already been applied, in July of 24, it results in market range 9, that compression effort, placing people at 3% of their range. Now, not everyone is there. We have plenty of market range 9 employees that are much further in their range penetration, but that helps to demonstrate the impact and the concern that we have in looking at those further ranges and trying to make adjustments. So the goal moving forward with funding would be to try to address and bring our market ranges 7 through 9 in particular, but really above, I'd say 7 plus, into that second quartile of their range. The quartiles for staff can be used very similarly, as you see the 85 to 115% range for faculty, where Q1 is really not a competitive place for anyone. You would expect to be bringing in those that are brand new to their profession, very minimal experience, like the minimum of Q2, 25% of the range. And upwards of full market median for those that are very experienced, have several years of demonstrated positive performance record, et cetera. That's where people would need to be at the market median. When we rolled out this new market range for staff in 2021, we had 70% of our staff in Q1 and Q2, 8% below Q1. They weren't even compensated within their range of what would be considered an appropriate market range. And we simply haven't had the funding to move people into those ranges and place them at appropriate points. So dedicating funding would be able to advance them further in the range and then hopefully address compression for those in the farther market ranges.
I think it's really interesting to look at like market range 9 for 24, 9% range penetration. The adjustment to the market ranges that the system implemented changed, we went down to 3% because our numbers haven't changed, but our penetration changed based on the rate, the range is changing. So that, and we hear a lot around campus that those market ranges in particular, 7, 8, 9, those are the most difficult for us to hire because of where we are compared to the market.
And I can give some context of what kind of jobs would be encompassed in 7, 8, 9. Market range 7 are our academic advisors. So that's our more entry level professionals. Those 90% of our advisors are in a market range 7 unless they're designated as a senior and maybe having a more advanced area of expertise. 8 and 9 is where you're going to see program coordinators, project managers, IT professionals. The IT analyst 1 group falls within that range. So you can see when you move a market range 1 to 69% of their range, the ripple effect that it creates and how we have to address these nuances. Market range 1, 2, and 3 are really in the reporting structure of a custodian group. So those would be those that are maybe foremen or have supervisory responsibilities for someone in a market range 1 or 2. Market range 4 and beyond is where you get into the designation of administrative associates on campus. So our admins and units are largely in market range 4, 5, and 6, 5 and 6 being the most common. And so that's individuals with full administrative support responsibilities with bookkeeping, accounting, et cetera. So it creates quite the ripple effect and hopefully helps to demonstrate the need.
So one thing and we'll look at a summary of all the needs. But one thing for this upcoming budget, because we did invest heavily in staff compensation for a couple of years, including minimum wage and compression. Depending on how much revenue we have available, we have to do some faculty adjustments this year. So, and I said that last year during budget sessions and again this year, but you know, the priority I think for this year would be whatever we do for a pool, you know, 3%, and then whatever we can do for faculty is going to be the next priority. So there may not, we may not be able to invest in any staff adjustments this year beyond, you know, the 3% pool. We'll just have to see where we land. We'll talk a little bit more about budget process shortly, but so this shows what you can see the top up there, 3.5 million is what it would cost for a 3% pool on campus. If you remember the revenue from the state, we're projecting 3.1 million. So we don't even,
2.2, sorry.
yeah, just plus the formula, yeah. I mean, but with salary pool and the formula, we still won't have enough to do the salary pool. Is our projection right now. So if we don't get a tuition increase, then that's gonna drastically change what we can do. You can see how much we have for faculty promotions and rollovers, and then the market and compression adjustments that Lori just mentioned. And then we've got some faculty positions that we've got already in the pipeline. Master's in Management program, site mental health nursing program. There's a chair of ethics and college business that's been on the list for a few years. That's current, just never been budgeted. We got two dual enrollment lectures that we will move to full recurring. And then we have new chemistry faculty that we have to fund for this next year. So some of those are going to have to be done regardless of anything else. Just kind of gives you a picture of how much we need and how much we expect. So, you know, no big shocker. We don't have enough money. I know that's a recurring theme, but that's where we are. So that leads me to the budget planning cycle. So you can see we're about to start in earnest our entire budget planning process here in January. You can see there's a line that has a strike through it on the screen, and I would like to see if there's any objection in this room to foregoing budget requests this year like we would normally do. So I know, I mean, I've been here 2 years. I know that for 2 years, there's been a lot of budget requests, most of them don't get funded, right? Because of all the other issues. With Dash and everything else happening, I mean, if you all want to do budget requests, but please tell me, we'll do it. But otherwise, I'm not sure I see a point in going through the exercise when we know that our projected revenue is fairly low and we know we have all these compensation issues. So the goal would be that we put all of our incremental increase in revenue toward compensation, except for some of the few things we know we have to fund, like the chemistry faculty and dual enrollment people that we've already hired. That's a very strategic priority for our enrollment goal. So any objection to that? Are you all, I mean, happy to entertain anything, do whatever you all want to do. What do we think?
That's what we have to do. How will we spend our time?
What would we do with that exercise of futility?
Yeah, I know on this end, it'll be spending a lot of Dash.
Alice and I are glad to come to your office and just talk about it.
Yeah.
I love that.
I mean, that's not to say, I mean, if people have like very urgent, very specific things that need to be funded, of course, let us know, but I just don't, I'm not sure that it's worthwhile for us to go through the entire exercise of spreadsheets and creating them and scrutiny them and going through all that. I'm just trying to be practical here with everything else that we have going on.
Do you see the system pushing expenses and not just Dash, but like maybe like we'll go down a crazy path of business continuity will come up at the Compton, the board level and then do you foresee anything coming down from all of the system level?
I do not currently. And it's interesting because there are some things like they're essentially unfunded mandates that we have to deal with, right? And, we have raised that issue, especially on the most recent CBO call. Several of us raised the fact that we've got some unavoidable expenses that we just have no control over, and it would be extremely helpful if the system would try to find some dedicated funding. They've talked about trying to get a pot of money from the state, like a one-time injection into the recurring budgets, for certain things, but last, it doesn't seem like it's coming there. All right, well, we're not gonna do the budget process unless somebody comes back and protests. So last thing I want to mention, then we'll open it up for any discussion, or if you all want to leave. The VRIP, we just wanted to provide an update on where we are on the voluntary retirement incentive plan. When we presented it to the board, we estimated a 50% application rate, and we hit 40%. So we didn't quite get to 50, but we did get to 40. So that's about 84 employees. You can see the salary dollars that represents as well as the payout for the incentive. So because of that payout, ideally, we hire some of these positions for 6 months. However, that being said, I know especially for certain faculty positions, if nothing else, you all will need to hire adjuncts to cover until we can recruit, new faculty. So we distributed the list of the applicants to all vice chancellors and deans. We've asked all vice chancellors and deans not to discuss the information with anyone until we've got to the January 13th period. So on January 13th, that's the date that everything's final, and then they have 7 days. Right.
Yeah,
After that.
7-day period to revoke.
So by January 20th, we would start pushing out the retention justification process. So, and Chris, you can jump in here if you want, but the plan is, well, go ahead. You want to talk about it?
Yeah.
Maybe it's something similar.
So we're gonna work on a formalized plan for the position retention justification process. So just like we have for Dash or the budget office or IT or HR, we're gonna have a ticketing system set up solely for this position retention process. That's in the works now. We'll have it rolled out by the January 20th deadline. So by the time that everybody is determined who is exactly taking it and who is not, you'll be able to, the department heads or vice chancellor, however you want to manage it within your division or college, will be able to go out there and for each position, submit a form with the needed information. Right now, the plan is everything that's received through the ticketing process will go back to the budget office. We'll collect those, and then most likely on a monthly basis, the chancellor, provost, and CBO will be able to review those and then go back and request some additional data. Request that there be discussion within your departments or divisions on a possible other solution, or can approve them or deny. So it should be a fairly fluid process, something that's going to be fair for everybody, because every single position will need to go through the same process. I think this would be a big improvement from what's been done in the past. 2 other times which we've done this, and it's largely been a email-based process system, loosely tracked. So this is going to be fair and equitable for everybody involved.
Yeah, so a couple of things we want to prioritize. So one, we are aware that this is out of cycle for faculty hiring for the most part. So we understand that it may be 6 months or a year before a new faculty can be hired to replace the retiring faculty. So whatever needs to be done to make sure they're offering courses, we're going to work through that. We understand that, we get it. We know we have to have courses. I think the goal would be though, and this is, and I meant to mention earlier, provost the provost and I normally co-chair this meeting. He is traveling and taking one for the team at SAC COC. So that's why he's not here today. But he and I have discussed this. He has reiterated that it's the same way we try to do it now. If a full professor retires, the goal is typically to replace that faculty with a assistant professor. And so there's savings alone with that delta, right? The difference between full professor and assistant professor in a lot of times. So, there's going to be savings there regardless, usually, which can then be reallocated for other salary issues that we need to figure out. And then, especially on the staff side, we are highly encouraging divisions to look at how duties can be redistributed, how you can reorganize, restructure your department, any of those sorts of things that doesn't mean exactly a one-for-one replacement. It's just a good opportunity for us to go through that process in our divisions to determine, do we need to fully replace this position or not? And if so, typically you're going to replace people at a lower salary cost than people who've been here for a long time. So we don't want to do this and then pay out all the money and then not mean anything, right? Like going through this process, we want to at least try to be better at the end of it, right? But having more money to reallocate, addressing all these compensation issues that you all see. So that's our goal with the VRIF. We want to make the justification process, like Chris said, fair and equitable, but also somewhat easy. So it's not going to drag out on and on. And we will, because Chancellor Engel told me this is what we were doing. If we're going to do a VRIF, we are going to prioritize faculty as soon as possible. So as soon as we get to January 20th, we really need to sit down and go through the impacts. Then the other thing, Laura, you want to talk about meetings with departments?
Yes. So last Wednesday, I think we distributed all applications for the verified division to each vice chancellor and dean, as Brent mentioned, and I followed up and requested meetings with those that probably need to make an assessment on the retirement date and any other considerations associated with the list of applicants within your respective areas. For many divisions, we already have meetings on the books. There's a few that I need to follow up with and make sure that we can, but really part of those conversations is going to be asking about that retirement date. There's several units that have multiple applicants. So we would want to discuss impact to those units, and standard retirement date under the program is June 30. Can we accommodate June 30 as a standard date for all of the individuals within those units, or do we need to consider phased retirement dates? We do have the opportunity to do that, but we need to have that information confirmed pretty quickly. So as an example, there's some units on campus that have 3 or more, and we might want to consider June 30 as the first retirement, or something sooner, May 1, June 30, and then something following June 30. Retirement dates beyond June 30, we need legal counsel approval as well. But the reason that we're pushing for that information now and have those conversations so quickly is because we have to turn around customized agreements for each of those 84 applicants. And part of that customization is the retirement date that they're considering and agreeing to. So if we need to stagger dates, it needs to be represented in that agreement that the human resources team will be issuing to them before the winter break. So by December 20th, there'll be a follow-up with each of the applicants. They'll have their agreement for consideration, and we would need to create that nuanced information for those that need to consider it.
Yeah, so I think many divisions have, there were people who are already in process of retirement, for example, that already had a retirement date, but they are allowed to participate. So you'll see some of that in the notes, like retirement dates that they've requested or already planned to do. And then there's other areas, like a good example is the power plant. So power plant for us is a 24/7 operation. We can't not have people there. I think 4 out of 4 people there are retiring. So we'll have to stagger those, right? And one wants to leave in January, for example, and others maybe June. But if we can't hire people by June 30th to replace them, we're going to have to stagger. So that's just an example of like really sitting down and looking at the impact. I think math and music both have some impact on families. It could be substantial. BGD does a lot of arts and science. I think arts and sciences and facilities have the largest impact of anybody.
And I see that the payout is pretty much showing half of the salaries, but don't you have to take into consideration annual leave pay as well?
So, yeah, go ahead. Have 50% of salary plus.
Plus,
any-
plus
annual.
whatever the annual leave pay, that was.
So this is just specific to the
This is
program.
just the payout, this doesn't include annual leave.
I was-
And this is not actual dollars, this is a lot. of
I figured that, I
Yeah.
just noticed it was half.
Because the leave payout occurs anyway, right? But when someone, like if someone retires, they're gonna get the leave anyway, so we just didn't show that on here. We
Right.
just showed only the program. Questions, comments, thoughts? I know, it's like, right.
I do. I'm sorry, my voice is gone, so can you hear? Can you hear?
This is the softest I've ever heard you speak.
Me too, I like it. I saw, a 68% 6-year graduation rate, is that right, or is that a goal? In the beginning?
That was what was reported last year.
That was last
Last
year,
year's
that was
graduation.
last year's graduation rate, which went into this current year's operating budget number.
That was
6
the,
year or 4 year?
That's 6 years.
6 years.
Yeah, 4 years.
yeah, 4 years closer. to 50.
No, it's 30,
Or 30.
37 or something.
6
Five, yeah.
6 year.
That's the 6-year graduation rate on the institutional dashboard. right?
Yeah. for-
Oh, yeah, sorry, 23. Who's next? Ronald.
Well, I think you were first. Question about criteria for, making requests against reserves. What are the criteria? Are there criteria? How is that?
So because. Let me go back.
It's 20 million.
Yeah, the issue is only 1.2 million is available from our campus reserve. So
So what's
Oh,
not
so-
shown in the available column, so there's $1.2 million shown, but also that doesn't cover the miscellaneous. Yearly transactions that we do mid-year, and also for any emergency shortfalls. In the mandatory fees, that's $7 million. A large chunk of that's available is in our transportation fee, which we're largely saving for the new parking garage, cash component of that. And then auxiliary is the 5.5 million is also largely attributed to housing, additional housing renovation needs that isn't in process right now.
it's really divisions and colleges that have the remaining available reserves. So
Yeah, but.
And you have access to those to use at your discretion.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking in principle, you know, if you had a real priority need, like enrollment, right, you need to go. And put a price tag on that for strategic investment. Would you have the means or do you have the mechanisms in place to take a percentage off of everybody, create a separate fund and put that in that project? I mean, conceptually.
conceptually, yeah.
But it also depends on, it also depends on what the source of the funds that are in the reserves. So if you have, we have reserve funds for student activity fees, but the funds, whether they're in reserves or not, can only spend.
Yeah, so these reserves are not unencumbered,
Correct.
they're unencumbered, but they're not, it's not the same color money. There's different colors of money and there's different rules associated with those kind of.
Yeah, they're not fully unrestricted, right? A lot of these have some restriction. Now, division and colleges are the most unrestricted,
Okay.
right? I mean, for the most part.
that-
But the other, I mean, the big issue we have with reserves currently is just the massive amount of capital projects we have going. We have all the local matches we have to provide, but then we also have cash just tied up. And now one thing I'm gonna try to, one thing I'm gonna pitch when we're in Knoxville in January for the capital projects meeting is to see if the system is willing to cover some of the cash or the gift commitments. So if they can cover some of the gift commitments on our behalf, especially like, for example, Rollins, right? Like, we know we're getting that money. It's happened before. It's not anything new. It's part of why we got the building. The fact that we're having to front, the money is crazy. The system got over $1 billion sitting there, so I don't know why we can't do this. So that's a pitch we're gonna make to see, that would help free up some money for very strategic priorities. But to your point, I mean, if something came up, like, let's say something came up and we just had a desperate need for $150,000, then I think that's a conversation, and we can see who can pitch in from different areas if necessary. That's the easiest way to accommodate some of that stuff. But my other big goal this year for the budget is to get all the things that have been non-recurring for 3 years into recurring. I mean, stuff that we have some like positions that have been there for 3 years that we've never funded. We've got to clean some of that stuff up, or we're never going to get out of the cycle of constantly trying to fill stuff that we've,
So-
a year later.
So those type of things are possible.
So I actually have two questions. The first one is, you have a proposed parking increase of 4%, but in several conversations that I've had with people, we're talking about losing around 200-ish parking spaces. So for,
More than that.
yeah, well, that's the ish. So, from a, visibility standpoint of people on campus, they're losing a lot of spaces. And then you're also increasing price of the parking that you do have available. That just sounds like it might not be a good combination for, PR. It's more a comment than a question.
I don't disagree. It's just it's just a really hard one for us right now with parking. I don't even know what else to say. Other than it's really difficult for us to figure out how to accommodate parking with the enrollment growth,
Right,
especially with the garage. The parking structure is gonna cost us $45,000 per space.
right.
And we're planning 700 spaces, so that will drastically help parking across campus once it's built, but that wouldn't be for all of 27.
I'll say also, and we can go down a rabbit hole on parking at any given time, but, and if you have any ideas on how to get good PR when it comes to parking, I'd love to hear that. But it over this 2.5 year period with all these construction projects going on, we're looking and exhausting every possible solution we have to add to replace the spaces we're using. We're going out in the community, looking at all the open lots surrounding campus that we don't own, trying to lease everything we can. We've talked to Unum multiple times, we've talked to all the churches surrounding, so we're trying to get a 1-for-1 spot replacement as best we can, but there's only so much area that's there. Two, is, we're losing that many 200 something spaces, there's 350 spaces down at Eagle every day too, so it's not like we're not gonna have enough spaces for everybody. And faculty, staff, majority of the time get here earlier than our commuter student population. And so they have an easier time to find the parking than what students do. It doesn't mean it's gonna be not a problem, but it's something that's always on our mind. We're always trying to address, think about, try to plan for it. So, and we're not out of, and the 4% increase too, not only goes towards future planning needs, current maintenance that goes on in the lots, but also for running the operations, if we get a 3% salary pool for all auxiliaries, 4%, majority of that 4% increase, the lawyers can go towards.
Yeah, I'm not saying you guys don't need the money. I'm saying if you are gonna charge 4% more, you really need to lay out why it's important and how it's gonna help people. And then also probably think about the people that are making $15 an hour and figure out how that 4% is not gonna impact them, because they probably need a right to park here also. So maybe there should be more conversations, and maybe the ERC would wanna talk about that more. Also, I'm just saying it impacts some people significantly more than it
Yeah.
impacts other people.
Understood, for
But
sure.
from a visual standpoint, everybody on the Karen's Facebook page, not me, everybody but me on the Karen's Facebook page is gonna be talking about 4% increase in parking and my little Bobby May can't find parking space when he comes back from his whatever appointment. So, I don't know,
Yeah.
but,
And we are, I agree. I agree. I mean, it's just not gonna be easy to message and we're gonna have to do it. But we are working through some optimization of parking as well. You know, the first step was to no longer allow reserved in general, which, you know, some people don't like. But most of the feedback from students was very positive, like they really like it. The last reserve lot that some faculty use that we want to change is lot 10. So anybody of you that park in lot 10, we will likely have, I mean, I don't think we're gonna have a choice. We're gonna have to convert that to general and then have faculty and staff reserve parking in 12, which is lot of the garage. So we're looking at having designated faculty staff like lot 26, 12, admin building, all the places people like 90, I think David ran an analysis, 94% of faculty and staff park. Where they park now, they'll continue to park. Lot 10 is the big one. And it's the biggest one in the center of campus. We get all the complaints about from students that come in, looking for a place to park, and half that lot's empty with reserved spots, right? And so that'll be something that we push out as well. We're gonna push out a lot of communications around parking in the spring. Spring, we don't think we'll have any issues in spring with parking. Fall is gonna be rough because
parking at Finley,
um
getting a shuttle down there for
All
freshmen.
7 cars?
What? For freshmen or something. I
So
mean,
we
like
have-
Freshmen at Finley
yeah.
or something.
there's Finley, there's also I mean Blue Cross has 4,000 spaces, it's open every day.
We
just need a
can
shuttle.
certainly do that.
Those are more last resort things for us to do because
Cheap, the shuttle, I mean.
well, we've offered $1 parking in England, we still never filled it up. So I think, and going to what you're saying though, I think we are experiencing the culture shift that needs to happen, where people don't expect that they're gonna park in the center of campus every single day. That's mostly students. Like Eagle, even during the busiest time of the day, still has 250 spaces open every single day. And more students are using it. And I think in the fall, they're trying to have choices. That gravel lot across from TSAS goes offline, as well as everything behind the channels. So that's gonna force more to Eagle. And depending on how bad it's looking, I'm totally open to doing like Finley or Blue Cross or anywhere. It's gonna be expensive for us to run a shuttle for those lots. That's a pretty expensive proposition, but we may not have a choice. There's a Unum lot that we're looking at now to take over operations of it, but it'll cost us a lot per month. We lease the 2 lots from them currently, but they also have the one at Vine in Georgia that's operated by Brightbase. It's over 100 spaces. But the only way that they'll likely let us do that is if we replace the revenue they're getting already off the lot. So, you know, we may have to pay $10,000 a month to at least 100 spaces.
Isn't that what the new federal courthouse for residents also?
That's
So
part of the
that's not a
sign.
good long-term.
No, but we do get back that whole gravel lot in front of CSAS in 2 years. It's a construction lay down there now because there's just nowhere else to do it. And then the other thing that we looked at is David's doing a lot of work around, he's working with Dr. Sartifi on cameras for lots so that we can have an app that tells students where spots are available. So we have one of those the pilot should be starting here sometime soon. And then Enterprise Rent-A-Car, they have a program where they can drop cars on campus for students to rent by the hour, by the day. So that would, you know, it's us providing options to then encourage people to not bring a car potentially because you don't have to pay for the parking, you don't have to worry about it. You can just be on campus, you can rent a car when you need to and that sort of thing. So we are looking at just every possible thing we can look at for parking. We're down to 0.45 spaces per person parking. So that's faculty, staff, students, and visitors. Our goal is to be at 0.48. We will go next year. We'll actually go down to 0.43. So it's going to be a rough 2 years of parking.
Okay, so my second thing, So as we move forward with increasing compensation for faculty, which is important based on the metrics that you showed us, and we're not looking at staff. We had spoken previously about a non-monetary compensation and looking at whether or not you could talk to the system about increasing the annual leave to 2 days a week for non-exempt staff. Has there been any more conversation on a system-wide level about thinking about the possibility?
They said no. Every time I asked, all 6 times. We did, even the last time, it wasn't just me the last time, all the campuses said that they would prefer to be moved to that. But we're told that will not happen. I do think though that we should still explore other non-monetary incentives, so. As much as we can. I mean, we can still push for the leave accrual, but it was pretty firm now when last time we brought it up.
And that was less than 6 months ago. So really the last push for having that conversation was with the approaching FLSA exempt salary threshold increase. That the first phase began July 1, realizing with January 1 looming, how many more employees would be impacted, potentially shift from exempt 16 hours of annual leave a month to non-exempt accruing further year of service. So that was something that Brent brought forward.
Lori also asked several times separately from me. We brought it up quite a bit. The Knoxville also, it was good that Knoxville said that they would like to see that change as well, but it was still, we were still holding them. Any other questions, comments, thoughts? No? All right, I've depressed everyone enough today.
All right.
Thank you all. It could be worse. We could be getting negative.
Then it could be the final.
It should be worse.
You're struggling, benefiting so much.